What's up, everybody? This is Mr. Longo, and this video is going to cover how you solve quadratic equations by factoring. So the last 4 videos you watched were on how to factor. So now we're going to apply factoring. I want to give you a little heads up before we even get started. Yes, you can use your graphing calculator to check to make sure you have solved correctly. But if ever it tells you to solve by factoring, you must show work. So the first thing you need to do when you are factoring is make sure that your equation is equal to 0. So this first one, we're good to go. After you are equal to 0, you factor as if it was just a plain old factoring question. So this is an example of the trinomial where you just have to find two numbers that multiply to 12 but add to 8. Simple enough. That's x plus 6 and x plus 2. So what we're going to do now, though, is those expressions are now equal to 0. So you have to remember that anything times 0 is 0, and 0 times anything is equal to 0. So basically, what you do is you take each one of the expressions and you set it equal to 0 and solve each one. So subtract 6 from both sides and x is equal to a negative 6. And subtract 2 from both sides, and it's also equal to a negative 2. Now remember from the other day, we talked about if it's a quadratic, your highest exponent, you can have up to that many solutions. So the answer to this is negative 6 and a negative 2. Again, you can substitute those in and check. You can use your graphing calculator to check. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you know how to factor. Then you just take your 2 terms or 3 terms, whatever you have when you're done factoring, and set them equal to 0. Anything with an x gets set equal to 0. Second one. The first thing you have to do is subtract the 14x to the left, because, as I mentioned, you must be equal to 0 before you may begin factoring. Another example here where we just have to figure out what two numbers will multiply to a negative 14 but add to a negative 5. That's going to be a negative 7 and a positive 2, and that's equal to 0. So you set both of those terms equal to 0, and you will end up with x is equal to 7 and a negative 2. Okay, so that's how you solve an equation by factoring. So what I'm going to ask you to do for these next 4 questions is to pause the video and try to factor and solve these guys on your own. And as soon as you're done, press play and see if you got them correct. Give it a shot. So this is the difference of 2 squares. You should have had x plus 4 and x minus 4. And that's equal to 0. Set each one of them equal to 0. And for this guy, you should have gotten x equals a negative 4 and a positive 4. If you got that, you are correct. The next example, the first thing you needed to do is subtract the 2 over to the left, because you must be equal to 0. And once we get there, you need to factor with a leading coefficient bigger than 1. So in the video, it showed you a couple of different ways to do it, but I told you that my favorite way to do it is splitting the middle term. So you had to multiply the 2 and the negative 12, and what you need to do is come up with two numbers that will multiply to a negative 24, but add to a positive 5. So that would be a positive 8x and a negative 3x. So see what I did? I just split 5 into 8 and negative 3. And that will multiply to a negative 24. This is the part where you group the first 2 and the second 2. And of course, that's equal to 0. Factor out your GCF of the first group. That would be a 2x, leaving you with x plus 4 inside. This one, you're factoring out a negative 3, leaving you with an x plus 4 on the inside. Remember, you did this correctly if the insides are the same. So you take your GCFs and you have 2x minus 3. You put them together. That guy is equal to 0. and you take this guy right here, you have your x plus 4, and he's equal to 0. So finally, you should have x is equal to a positive 3/2 and a negative 4 after you solve both of those guys for x. The next example, what you're trying to do is figure out two numbers that will multiply to a 6 and add to 8. So I can think of 6 times 1, 2 times 3, and I can't think of anything. So right now, we're going to say that this one has no real solution. So remember when we were talking about factoring, if it couldn't be factored, we would just call it prime. Well, if you're solving and you can't factor it, we just say there's no real solution. Someday down the road, we will be able to solve that, but it's going to require imaginary numbers and some other fun stuff like that. Last equation here, you've got x cubed minus 6x squared plus 5x. That's equal to 0. Again, the first step, you must be equal to 0. Now you need to factor out your GCF. So you're going to factor out an x from all of these, leaving you with x squared minus 6x plus 5, and that's equal to 0. We still need to factor this guy, so that's going to give us what two numbers multiply to a negative or a positive 5 but add to a negative 6. That would be a negative 5 and a negative 1. Now, when you are solving, everything with an x gets set equal to 0. So x equals 0, x minus 5 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. So x actually has three solutions. It's 0, 5, and 1. And yes, you have to list all three, but remember what I told you earlier. The highest exponent is the possible number of solutions. So we can have up to 3 different solutions. Okay? So that's that. That's the video on solving. So really, if you know how to factor, it's just one more step. Set each term equal to 0 and solve each term individually. Okay? This is Longo and I'm out. See you bye.